Adanna stood at the door of their home in Lagos, her hands tightly crossed over her chest. Her mother's voice rose in frustration, but Adanna refused to look at her. She was too angry, too hurt to meet her mother's eyes. "You're the eldest," her mother said. "It's your duty. Mama's old and sick, and she's all alone in the village now that your grandfather has passed. Someone has to take care of her." "Why does it have to be me?" Adanna snapped, tears stinging her eyes. "I have dreams too. I have a life here. Friends, school, and Tayo." Her voice broke as she said his name, the thought of leaving him making her chest tighten. Her mother sighed, rubbing her temples as if she was trying to hold herself together. "Your siblings are too young, Adanna, and Mama asked for you. She trusts you." Adanna shook her head. "That's not true. She doesn't care about me, and I don't care about her." She stormed off to her room, slamming the door shut behind her. She threw herself onto her bed, burying her face in her pillow to stifle her sobs. By the time she arrived at her grandmother's house in the village, Adanna's anger hadn't faded. It clung to her like a dark cloud, making everything feel dull and heavy. Her grandmother's house was small and old, with cracked walls and a roof that groaned when the wind blew. Her grandmother, frail and bent with age, smiled softly when she saw Adanna arrive, but the warmth wasn't returned. "Adanna, come in, my child," her grandmother said, her voice trembling. Adanna stepped inside, barely looking at her. She dropped her bag on the floor and sat down without a word. Her grandmother sighed but said nothing. Life in the village was nothing like Lagos. The days were long, slow, and lonely. Adanna hated the quiet, the endless chores, and the smell of the burning firewood that clung to her clothes. Her grandmother would ask her for help, fetching water, cooking, or cleaning. But Adanna would either ignore her or do the bare minimum. One morning her grandmother said, "Adanna, the pot is empty. Go to the stream and fetch some water." Adanna rolled her eyes. "Why can't you ask someone else to do it? I'm not your servant." She turned away and walked back to her room, leaving her grandmother standing there in silence. Days turned into weeks, and Adanna's bitterness only grew. She missed Lagos, Tayo, her first love, missed everything she had been forced to leave behind. And she took that anger out on her grandmother, snapping at her, avoiding her, and refusing to help whenever she could. Her grandmother tried to be patient, but Adanna's behavior weighed heavily on her. One evening, after another argument, her grandmother sat alone in her room. She opened an old wooden box that she had kept hidden for years. Inside were things from her youth, beads, charms, and a small, dusty book with faded writing. "I tried to show her love," her grandmother whispered to herself, her hands trembling as she flipped through the pages. "But she has left me no choice." With a deep sigh, she began to chant the words of an old spell, her voice shaking at first but growing steadier with each line. "May she walk in the shoes of others. May she feel their pain, their joy, and their burdens. Only then will she learn." Then her grandmother passed away. Adanna informed her mother over the telephone about the death of her mother. She wanted to return to the city quickly. However, her mother told her to wait in the village until the burial of her grandmother. The next morning, Adanna woke up feeling strange. Her body felt different, heavier, unfamiliar. When she opened her eyes, she saw a room she didn't recognize, with walls painted in bright colors and curtains that fluttered in the morning breeze. Confused, she sat up and looked down at herself. Her hands were older, rougher, and covered in rings. Slowly, she opened her eyes, expecting to see the thatched roof of her family's small hut, but instead she saw a canopy of gold-trimmed silk. Her heart pounded. This wasn't her room. She sat up abruptly, the rustling of silk robes against her skin startling her. Her hands, adorned with gold bangles and rings, were older and softer than they should have been. She gasped, scrambling out of the bed and rushing toward a gilded mirror on the wall. The face staring back at her wasn't hers. It was a beautiful, older woman with flawless skin and expensive jewelry. The woman she had seen in the marketplace just last week, the wealthy trader's wife. Adanna touched her face in disbelief, and the reflection mimicked every move. "What is happening to me?" she whispered, her voice trembling with panic. The door creaked open, and a maid walked in, bowing slightly. "Madam, the master has asked for you in the dining hall. Breakfast is ready." Adanna froze. Master?" she stuttered, but the maid didn't seem to notice her confusion. "Yes, madam," the maid said, waiting patiently. Swallowing her fear, Adanna decided to play along. Something told her that the answers she sought would not come easily. Adanna entered the grand dining hall, her steps hesitant. A stout man with a bushy mustache, her husband, smiled at her warmly. "Good morning, my dear," he said, gesturing to the seat across from him. "Good morning," she mumbled, sitting down. The man began chatting about his day, discussions with merchants, shipments of goods. But Adanna struggled to focus. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was trapped in a nightmare. But as the day unfolded, she began to notice something. The servants in the house avoided meeting her eyes. A young maid flinched when Adanna accidentally brushed her hand. The gardener muttered under his breath whenever he thought she wasn't listening. By evening, Adanna realized the truth. This woman, the trader's wife, was feared. But it wasn't respect. It was resentment. Everyone in the household despised her for how she treated them. That night, as the sun set, Adanna felt a sharp tug in her chest. The world spun, and darkness enveloped her. When she woke up, she was no longer in the trader's wife's body. Adanna woke up on a straw mat, the sound of waves crashing against the shore filling her ears. She sat up, her body aching, and realized she was in a small, dimly lit hut. Her hands were rough and cracked, and her clothes smelled of salt water and fish. A boy no older than 12 entered the hut, carrying a basket of fish. "Papa, the boat's leaking again. We'll need to fix it before the next catch," he said, placing the basket down. "Papa?" Adanna repeated, her voice raspy. The boy gave her a puzzled look. "Are you okay?" Adanna forced a nod. "Yes, I'm fine," she lied. She stood up and glanced at a cracked mirror propped against the wall. Her reflection showed a thin, wiry fisherman with sun-worn skin. She was living in the body of a man who spent his days battling the sea. Later that day, Adanna joined the boy on the boat, watching as he worked tirelessly to mend the leaks and cast the nets. She felt his frustration as he struggled with the heavy workload, his eyes filled with exhaustion, but also determination. By sunset, Adanna had learned the boy's story. He was the fisherman's son, and they were barely surviving after the boy's mother had passed away. Adanna felt a pang of guilt. Back in her real life, she had often taken her own parents' sacrifices for granted, never realizing how much they endured for her. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the familiar tug in her chest returned. The world spun once more, and darkness enveloped her. Adanna quickly learned the truth about her strange existence. Her grandmother's spell wasn't just a punishment, it was a lesson, one that forced her to live the lives of others, feeling their joys, pains, and struggles. The spell was designed to open her heart to the reality of the world outside her own privileged perspective. Every morning she woke up in a new body, and every night, the pull of the spell yanked her into the darkness of yet another life. She had been a farmer, toiling under the scorching sun with blistered hands and a back that ached from years of labor. She had been a child abandoned on the streets, scavenging for food while enduring the harsh stares of passers-by. She had been a grieving widow, carrying the weight of loss. And once, she found herself as a bride on her wedding day, filled with hope and love that she knew would slip through her fingers by sunrise. Each life revealed a new layer of human existence, some beautiful, others heartbreaking. Through it all, Adanna began to feel the burden of understanding, and with that understanding came change. One evening, after living the day as a potter struggling to sell her wares, Adanna found herself alone by a riverbank. She gazed at her reflection in the water, this time a weathered face with deep-set eyes, and thought of her grandmother. "Why couldn't you just talk to me?" she whispered into the quiet night. "Why did it have to be this way?" But no answer came. Her thoughts were interrupted by a rustling sound behind her. She turned quickly, her heart racing, and saw a man stepping out from the shadows. His eyes gleamed in the moonlight, sharp and calculating. "So it's true," the man said, his voice smooth and confident. "You're the one who walks in others' skins." Adanna backed away instinctively. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear creeping into her chest. "Nnadozie," he said with a slight bow, though the gesture felt mocking. "A humble medicine man, but you, my dear, are far from humble. You carry a gift, or perhaps a curse, that the world has never seen, and I intend to make use of it." Adanna's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" Nnadozie smiled, his teeth gleaming. "Your ability to inhabit other bodies. It's not just a trick of fate, it's power. Imagine the possibilities, the lives I could control, the influence I could wield. If only I had you under my control." Adanna took another step back, her mind racing. "I don't understand what you're talking about," she said, trying to feign ignorance. But Nnadozie wasn't fooled. "Oh, I think you do. And I've already set things in motion. The spell your grandmother cast on you is tied to her essence. But I've found a way to sever that connection and make it mine. Soon you won't move from body to body unless I allow it. Your freedom is already slipping away, little one." Adanna's heart pounded as she turned and ran, her bare feet slipping on the muddy bank. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away. Nnadozie's laughter echoed behind her. "Run all you want. You can't escape me forever." For the first time since this ordeal began, Adanna felt true fear, not just for herself, but for the lives she would touch in the days to come. If Nnadozie gained control of her, it wouldn't just be her own freedom that was lost. The lives she inhabited, the people she encountered, would all be at his mercy. That night, as she lay in a dark corner of a stranger's barn, Adanna whispered a prayer into the stillness. "Grandmother, if you can hear me, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I see it now. But please help me. I don't know how to fight this." The wind outside howled as if in response, and for a moment Adanna thought she heard a faint voice in the breeze. "The answer lies within." And then came the morning when everything changed. Adanna woke up in Nnadozie's body. She opened her eyes to the dim light of his cluttered, mysterious home. She felt the weight of his power, his strength, and his malevolent intent, and it chilled her to the bone. As she looked around trying to make sense of her new surroundings, she discovered a hidden room at the back of his house. It was filled with books, scrolls, and strange trinkets, items that looked like they belonged to a different world. There she uncovered a series of dark rituals Nnadozie had planned. His ultimate goal wasn't just to trap her in the body she inhabited, it was to destroy her real body, and by doing so, trap her soul forever in the web of his magic. Adanna felt a wave of panic wash over her, realizing just how much danger she was in. This was no longer just a curse, it was a race against time. She had to stop him before he could carry out his plan. Frantic and desperate, Adanna sought out anyone who might help her. She knew she couldn't face Nnadozie alone. That's when she found Adanna, a young healer who lived on the outskirts of the village. He had always been kind to her, even when she had lived as others in the village, and he had been one of the few who believed in the strange power that seemed to be controlling her. "Adanna, you have to help me," Adanna said urgently, her voice filled with fear. "Nnadozie is planning something terrible. I don't know how much time I have left. If he succeeds, I'll never return to my real body." Adanna listened intently, his brow furrowed in thought. "We need to uncover the truth. There's a reason this is happening to you, and I believe it's connected to your family. You need to find the betrayal in your own bloodline." The words hit Adanna like a bolt of lightning. She had been searching for answers in the wrong places. All this time, she had been focused on Nnadozie, not realizing that the curse was rooted within her own family. As days passed, the curse began to intensify. Adanna woke up one morning to find herself in the body of her younger sister, Nkem. At first, she was confused. Nkem was just 16 years old. How could she be a part of this twisted plan? But as Adanna walked in her sister's shoes, she began to see something she hadn't noticed before. Nkem had been acting strangely, keeping to herself, and showing a level of maturity far beyond her years. In a moment of realization, Adanna pieced everything together. While living in Nkem's body, she realized that her younger sister Nkem had been secretly working with Nnadozie. It was jealousy, Adanna realized. Nkem had always felt overshadowed by Adanna, her accomplishments, her beauty, the love everyone had for her. Nkem had wanted to take it all for herself, to destroy the very person who had everything she wanted. She had gone to Nnadozie, begging him to help her rid herself of the older sister who was always the center of attention. Adanna's heart broke. She was disappointed in her younger sister, but she decided to forgive her from the depth of her heart. The curse's power began to waver as Adanna's forgiveness broke the hold it had over her. She and Adanna returned to Nnadozie's lair, ready for their final confrontation. Together, they outwitted the medicine man, using his own magic against him. The web of lies and deceit he had spun around Adanna unraveled, trapping him in the very spells he had created. The next day, Adanna woke up in her own body for the first time in months. She was back. The world around her felt brighter and clearer. She was whole again, and though the experiences of the past months had shaken her, they had also changed her forever. When her family came for her grandmother's burial, Adanna confronted her younger sister Nkem, who stood trembling before her in tears. "I didn't mean to hurt you," Nkem cried, her voice breaking. "I was jealous. I wanted to be loved like you. I wanted to be special." Adanna looked at her sister, her own anger fading as the weight of Nkem's vulnerability sank in. Despite the betrayal, she found it within herself to forgive Nkem. "You don't have to be like me to be special. You've always been enough." She had learned empathy, true empathy, for the people whose lives she had lived. The hardships, the love, the betrayal, and the sacrifice had all left their mark on her heart. She no longer saw the world with the same eyes. Now she was determined to use her newfound understanding to help heal the village. Her first act was to speak to her family, to forgive and heal the rift that had almost destroyed them. And then, with Adanna's help, Adanna worked to rebuild the trust of the villagers, using the lessons she had learned in the bodies of others to foster unity and understanding. The village, once divided by secrets and fear, began to heal, and so did Adanna. The end.